Okay, why don't we get started again? Hopefully people are back with us. Let me thank and applaud Robin, Rick, Marcy, and Casey for joining the discussion earlier today. That was an excellent discussion, both about the history of some of the challenges at the State Department with respect to some of the privately funded programs, but also most importantly about how both Marcy and Casey think about, and other sponsors think about, partnering up with people abroad and here in the United States, and the importance of really understanding the programs from a sponsor perspective, but also helping host employers, host institutions, and recruiters and other partners abroad understand these programs. Because as I think Casey and Marcy said, everyone who's involved in these programs are involved together. And so thank you for sharing some of those thoughts. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Washington, D.C. Today, what's been happening up throughout the year, the work that we've been doing, and what we think may be happening in the near future. I thanked Lane Kavanaugh earlier for her work putting this online session together and managing it. I also want to thank our two program fellows, Evelyn Adams and Kayla McCabe, for their work. Both of them are grad students here in Washington, D.C. Just a reminder that this next session is about 50 minutes long. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to be joined by the Deputy Assistant Secretaries from the State Department for a discussion around a bunch of questions that we received from all of you in advance. And then we'll take a break between that session and the next session, which will be a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion before we wrap up the day. So let's just a quick reminder for those of you who are new to the Alliance. The Alliance, our mission is to promote the growth and impact of exchange programs and the effectiveness of our members. I think all of you know that we represent a full range of international exchange programs, educational and cultural exchange, both those that are privately funded, but then also those that are federally funded. And we will be talking about the work that we've been doing on behalf of the full range of our members. The discussion today will be focused initially on the challenges we've been facing as an exchange community, how we at the Alliance have engaged collectively with all of you around some of those challenges. The accomplishments that we've had, that's really important, because as we think about the future, we want to reflect on the things that have gone well and the work that we've done, and that will help inform how we tackle some of the challenges that will be coming up. And I want to try to leave some questions at the end for you all to raise with me, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions. So let's start with the biggest challenge. I think all of us understand that COVID-19 has been, I think Robin said this in the lead up to one of her questions. I think Marcy talked about this too. Big, unforeseen, enormous challenge that has changed all of our lives, and that's been very significant. The COVID-19 challenge has played out in various ways over the last couple of years to create broad challenges for exchange programs writ large. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges we had coming into the new year was the Presidential Proclamation 152, which effectively banned participants on a bunch of privately funded exchange programs from coming into the United States while the proclamation was in effect. The outgoing administration extended it through March of this year, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the work we did around that proclamation. The travel bans, the incoming administration extended the travel bans indefinitely. We'll talk about some of the work we did there. Of course, we've seen visa processing issues throughout the globe. And those challenges have been really enormous. We'll talk about some of the work we did on visa processing, and then even more importantly, in the next segment, which I will be honored to lead, as a moderator, will ask the State Department about visa processing issues going forward. The State Department revised the way it determines their travel advisories for people who are sending Americans abroad. That's a big deal. And that change had the impact of essentially shifting most of the world to a level 4 do not travel advisory in the spring. And that was a broad challenge. And then, of course, congressional funding. We're going to talk about congressional funding and exchange programs. And normally, congressional funding priorities in other areas wouldn't be listed as a challenge. But when you're spending trillions of dollars elsewhere and a community like ours is trying to get some really meaningful funding for these programs, that can be a challenge. And understanding that context, I think, is really important. So let's talk a little bit about the Alliance engagement, what that's looked like. We started off the year really pretty strong with 387 organizations on a letter to President-elect Biden, even before he took office, talking about Proclamation 152 and the importance of either rescinding that proclamation or letting it expire. And as Rick pointed out earlier, challenges within administrations around questions that might be tinged with controversy or maybe even with politics can be difficult. And even though we have in this new administration a very supportive administration, the politics surrounding a presidential proclamation like 152 were pretty significant. And the fact that we were able to come together as a community, the way in which we're together today during these online sessions, sponsors of exchange programs, those that facilitate and support them, the host employers and others, around a joint effort to call attention to the impact of Proclamation 152 and to call for its expiration was really important. And of course, it was not rescinded, but the proclamation was allowed to expire, and that was terrific. Visa processing challenges have been very extensive, and part of what we worked to do with our members was to describe the story of the impact of visa processing challenges on our members. And what we found after surveying our members was that there was compared to 2019, a 75% decrease in visa processing of their participants. Now, this was on top of 2020, where the number is much higher, about a 90% drop. But still, in a year when a lot of us were talking about rebuilding these programs, and of course, that's one of the themes of this conference, right? Reconnecting, rebuilding, renewing. In a year that we were talking about and anticipating rebuilding, the fact that we continue to see those type of numbers was very disturbing. And we were able to share that information with the State Department, with the media, and also with people like Senator Cory Booker. You heard him talk about the visa processing challenge. And in fact, he was very involved in engaging with the State Department and trying to communicate the importance of these programs and what was happening out the field. And we were happy to see that ECA, as it has throughout the pandemic, engaged with us on visa processing issues, primarily around embassy-specific or country-specific challenges. And so we're happy to see that kind of dialogue and that partnership between us. And that was really important for us to work on. Of course, there were travel bans that we were all managing and dealing with. And at the Alliance, early on, we were pushing for national interest exceptions. And around various programs, and we're happy to see that some of those ideas were adopted by the State Department earlier in the spring, primarily for academic J-1 programs, but also in a more limited way for au pair programs. We also pushed for interview waivers, and the State Department there as well instituted limited interview waivers. We would have liked to have seen something much more extensive, but still working with the State Department on that was really important. And then, of course, the Alliance pushed early on for lifting the travel bans themselves. So as President Joe Biden has said often, that the administration's approach to COVID-19, as much as possible, they want to tie to the science around COVID-19. And of course, the science, in our view, dictated that there'd be a more individualized approach to travel to the United States, and lifting the travel bans and instituting something that was much more individually oriented was really important. And so we're happy to see just a month or so ago the announcement that the travel bans would be lifted. The bans on 33 countries would be lifted as of this coming Monday. There are a number of things associated with the travel bans being lifted that are important for us to be aware of. One is that the vaccines that are permissible for travel to the United States, proof of vaccination, go beyond what in the United States are approved vaccinations. So having WHO approved COVID-19 vaccines is really important. That's something that the Alliance pushed for early on. And we also were pushing for exceptions to the vaccination mandate itself. One of the things we all know is that when it comes to vaccinating people, developing countries have a leg up, right? We have lots of vaccines in this country. We're vaccinating people at really high rates. That's true of other developed countries, but it's not true of a whole swath of countries for whom getting vaccinations is really quite difficult. So we're happy to see the administration make an exception for children under 18, and also to continue to allow proof of a negative test for applicants coming from countries that are having difficulty vaccinating their people. The definition of that exception is that those countries have 10% or less of the people vaccinated. Our sense is that that's a pretty low number. I think we, together with others, will be paying attention to how that plays out in real life to see the degree to which we might work with our friends in the Congress and also our friends within the administration and get that exception adjusted. So it's good that it's there. It's a really important start, and we'll see what happens in the near future and what might need to be changed. We also decided earlier this year that we would join a lawsuit called Kinsley versus Blinken, given the practice, which we thought was not supportable, of not interviewing candidates in travel ban countries, effectively having a visa ban in travel ban countries. And we're pleased to see that the court basically said a little bit earlier this fall that the department, relying on those presidential proclamations as a basis for ceasing visa adjudications, was improper. And that's very important, even though that decision came just weeks before the switch to a vaccination mandate. In our view, that decision is important for this administration and future administrations when it's thinking about challenges like these and how it might approach emergency situations and the degree to which visa adjudication needs to move forward even when we have challenges. And of course, that's important for a range of programs, especially those associated with families who are trying to prepare for the spring semester and might be thinking about au pairs, or host employers who are looking forward to having work and travel participants for the winter session, or those companies that are hoping to bring some of their employees here for trainee programs, and of course other programs as well. So that was a very important decision, and we were happy to be a part of it. So I think as we think about the challenges over the course of the year, they've been very significant. And I think most of us are probably focused on those challenges and how difficult they've been. But it's worth looking at this list sort of side by side, right? Because you've got the proclamation, the travel bans, visa processing, financial burden issues, and other issues, travel advisories, which we'll talk about a little bit, some proposed changes on the high school program, and other challenges that emerged this year. But effectively, we have worked with the State Department and with the administration and also with our friends in Congress to achieve a number of successes, and we just talked a little bit about those. So it's good to see that kind of work between us and our friends at the State Department, and of course involving many of you in the work that we did. And we'll talk about in a second the keys to success. How do we achieve all those things in a year that's been so difficult? Well, first of all, we have continue to have bipartisan support for international exchange programs. So in addition to Cory Booker, there are a wide range of Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and in the House, at the government, at the state level, the governor level, at the local level, people who understand the value of these programs and support them. And part of the reason we have that, a big part of the reason, is because a lot of you do what Rick Ruth was talking about, which is explain your programs to members of Congress and their staff, come to Washington, engage with people here in Washington, D.C., explain your programs to them as well, and share your success stories and your statistics, your impact of these programs. Of course, and the other reason why we had success was that there were really large issues at stake, and we had allies on the travel ban and the visa processing issues and other issues that went beyond the exchange community. So in that sense, we were lucky to have a larger group of people where the stakes were really high working with us. And at the Alliance, we're happy to partner with other associations in the work that we've done, and that has helped us be successful. We have a very supportive administration and the Department of State, and I would also say Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Education, and other departments. And having that kind of supportive administration is very important. I should say in the last administration, we worked very closely with the State Department and had the same experience with them with respect to these programs, support, understanding, involvement, and engagement, and we're thankful for that. The Alliance also engaged this year, as we did last year, with a larger number of stakeholders than ever before. So we have gone beyond and continue to go beyond our membership. We understand that the Alliance represents its members first and foremost, but of course, the impact of the work that we do goes beyond our members, right? The impact of our collective community is on the community of organizations and people and institutions and participants and alumni and State Department and funders of these programs who care about these programs, support them and facilitate them, in addition to sponsor them. And we're doing our best to try to involve as many people as we can during these very challenging times, times when we've had successes, but challenging nonetheless. And of course, as we've done that work, we've seen host institutions here in the United States, higher ed institutions, host employers, host families in some instances, and also international partners engage. I mentioned earlier letters that we've sent to the administration with hundreds of companies and organizations on them, and it's good to see people come together around a common interest and a common cause for a common purpose. I have to say, here in Washington, D.C., we've also been excited to see international partners organize themselves abroad, efforts in Peru, in Turkey, in Jamaica, and elsewhere. those efforts are very meaningful. Many of you have used some of the playbooks that you've either developed in your own countries or maybe you've seen here in the United States in advancing your collective interest. And that's the kind of thing I think that makes for strong partners who are able to share the importance and the impact of their programs in a way that's very effective. And of course, the Alliance as an umbrella organization that brings people together across these programs and has a convening power that we have makes it possible for us to work together and have this kind of success. And that's key. And not only did we do a lot of work this past year around some of the issues we just talked about around visa bans and visa processing issues and other issues, but we also continue to advance the funding of these exchange programs. If we look at federal funding of exchange programs over the last 11, going on 12 years, we see something really interesting, which is that in the early 20-teens, there were significant challenges when it came to funding these programs, and there were differences of approach between the request here in gold of the in gray of the administration asking for funding of these programs with the congressional support for these programs. During the last administration, the requests from the executive branch for funding of exchange programs really dropped dramatically. But part of what we saw, and the result of what I said before of bipartisan support for these programs was Congress continuing to support the international exchange programs at fairly high levels. And if you look at this chart, really record level of funding despite the drop in requests from the executive branch. Now, it's been great to see with the new administration, those requests for funding of exchange programs go back up and exceed some of the requests that we've seen before. And again, that comes from bipartisan support. It comes from people like Cory Booker, the letter he puts together every year, his effort, and also Hank Johnson over on the House side and others, the people who signed those letters, and we're very appreciative to them, and also to all of you for your engagement with those members of Congress, because that engagement makes what we do in Washington, D.C. Possible. It also is a reflection of the work that international partners do in selecting participants and host institutions in the United States do in supporting those participants. Because this funding, if we had programs where people were, there were the wrong people selected, or their expectations were off, and dissatisfaction with these programs was high, then you wouldn't see this type of support or international exchange programs, financial support. And so this is a testament to what Rick and Marcy and Casey were talking about, partnerships that work to support exchange participants and to ensure that they're happy in these programs. So the Alliance thinks that it's time for Congress to really dramatically increase support for exchange programs. So the enacted support for these programs is at $740 million. $0.3 million, and that's very high. And as I mentioned, that's at record levels. But given the enormous challenges we see abroad when it comes to defending and supporting democracy, counteracting misinformation, reaching new people and new places abroad, outside of cities and countries that don't send enough of their people in the United States, and reaching people here in the United States. Again, people not just in cities, but also in rural areas and other areas, underrepresented populations, in supporting exchange programs, not only on the ground and sort of people to people, but also taking what we've learned about virtual exchange and making that a permanent feature across as many programs as possible. And conveying and sharing American values and teaching people about American values. And doing all these things combating climate change and other things. And doing all these things, international exchange programs are one of the best investments that the United States can make. And yet, out of a $50+ billion budget to the State Department, these programs are under $1 billion in terms of funding. And of course, we're appreciative to the U.S. Congress for its support. But this is a good time to start increasing that support. And part of what we want to see at the Alliance is an appropriation that's closer to $1.1 billion. You heard Cory Booker talk earlier about that number. And for the first time, both he and Hank Johnson and others in the letters that they've brought together on the House and the Senate embraced the Alliance ask. In past years, their letters to the appropriators in Congress were focused on gaining the most funding possible, whereas the Alliance year to year asked for a specific number. And we were thrilled to see this year that both of those letters named that request, that $1.1 billion, and embraced it. You heard Senator Booker embrace that request earlier today. So the administration's request is just a little bit over what was enacted in FY 2021. The House, a little bit more than that, and the Senate, we are engaging with the House and the Senate now as they're trying to figure out the FY 22 budget for these programs, and hopefully we will see in that budget a more substantial increase and an investment and a down payment in these programs, because it's warranted and it's needed, most importantly. We also worked this past year on a range of other issues. As I mentioned earlier, there are issues regarding the travel advisories and the challenges with the adjustments that the State Department made to those programs. And we were happy to bring together a coalition of our members, associations that support higher education and students that come, students that go abroad and others that go abroad, but also associations that are not members of the Alliance. And so we were thrilled to be able to convene that group and play a facilitating role. And the State Department, and I should say CDC as well, were very responsive in thinking about the travel advisories, adjusting the criteria, and making changes that better reflected the true status of countries abroad. And those changes pretty soon after resulted in many of the travel advisories dropping from a level 4 to a level 3. So we're happy to see that. Of course, on the au pair front, we continue to work with the administration in encouraging them to put out a clarifying regulation with respect to au pair. We'll be able to ask a question of the State Department in the next session about that regulation and where it is. We were happy to work also with the State Department on a number of issues involving secondary schools, the national interest exceptions for academic J1 visas, which ECA worked very hard within the State Department to secure those, and congratulations to them for the work that they did. And then there were other issues involving fingerprinting, academic credit, and other issues that we were happy to work with the State Department, and they were very responsive there as well. And then just this past fall, we helped to convene a Afghan alumni working group, given the difficulties that alumni in Afghanistan are facing, especially those who have left Afghanistan, are hoping to come to the United States and want to do other work. It's absolutely critical work. I think one of the things we were reminded by Catherine Brown, as a member of our board, when she brought this initiative to us, was the enormous resources that the United States poured into Afghanistan over the past 20 years. The number of adults in Afghanistan and professionals who are involved in exchange programs and students and others is just collectively, our community has invested a lot in Afghanistan and the Afghan people, and we are happy at the Alliance to support that kind of working group. So, and I should say, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's coming up next and some resources. If you all are thinking about questions and you want to start formulating those and sending them to Lane, that would be a good thing. So I think that the question for us as we think about rebuilding next year is what comes next, right? So we just talked about what came before today, the enormous challenges that all of us were faced with, the ways in which we came together as a community to share information, to press for change, to ask for an understanding, to push for policy changes, to inform the Congress, and to get their support, and also to involve and tell our story in the media. Those are all good lessons learned, but what comes next? And I think we're all hoping, and maybe this is, cross your fingers time, that the pandemic recedes and that international travel really resumes next year in a way that we anticipated it resuming this year. Of course, there's that big question of, is there going to be a new variant, the Delta variant, threw a wrench in so much of our work and what we anticipated for this year. But let's assume that there isn't a new variant lurking out there, and that international travel resumes, and that the what we see from the State Department with respect to vaccination mandate is working, and if it's not working, that it's adjusted so that we have, in our view, equal opportunity across the globe when it comes to traveling to the United States to be on these programs, right? We don't want just people coming from advanced democracies that have the funds and the ability to secure vaccines. We also want those others who can come here, prove that they have a negative test, and then get vaccinated in the United States to come here. And so that's going to be really important. That's something for all of us to be thinking about and working on. The visa processing challenges are significant today, and they will continue to be significant. I had an exchange with a couple of my members earlier this week around the travel ban being lifted, and was reminded that, yeah, it's great that that's happening, but visas are really, I should say, embassies are having a real challenge processing visas, and unfortunately that's going to continue for a time, both because of the backlog, but especially because of on the ground conditions in various countries involving embassy staff and local staff. There was a question that was posed earlier to Rick Ruth about transparency, and I think that one of the things that we want to encourage from the State Department and the administration is as much transparency as possible when it comes to the situation on the ground at embassies and visa processing challenges, and what those challenges are, and why some of those challenges continue. Certainly federal funding has been steady. As I said, we want to see that funding increased, and we think that this is a good time in FY22, and we're going to continue to push for that. Part of what we're thinking about, and you'll hear some questions posed to ECA in just a bit, is how does ECA think about regulatory accommodations and support? What are the things that ECA can be doing to make it easier for you all who sponsor these programs, those who host, and those who recruit for them, easier for you to do the work you need to do to rebuild? I think something that we also need to be aware of for some of the challenges. We have people out there who are opponents of these programs for various reasons. And those people are still there on the left and the right of the political spectrum, and they will continue to be present and seeking to change the nature of these programs, and we need to be mindful of that as we do our work and continue to view our work with some degree of urgency. Political divisions in the U.S. continue. I think we've seen that continues to be the case. Politics is also always a divisive activity. I've worked in the political world now my entire adult life, and so there's always divisions. Those divisions, for the most part, in the past, have felt focused in Washington D.C. And among really sort of diehard advocates. I think part of what's changed with the internet is that political divisions have been dramatically extended beyond those participants. So those are things that we're thinking about as we think about the future. One of the things that we want you all to know before I turn to questions is we have resources on the Alliance website for you all. You heard Cory Booker talk about New Jersey. I should have had the New Jersey fact sheet up here. We have put together information that is state specific for every state. You heard him cite the Alliance fact sheet for New Jersey. These fact sheets can be found. They're state specific, and basically the story they tell for every state is that exchange programs have a huge impact on every state in the United States when it comes to American students who study abroad, international students who study here in the United States, the privately funded programs and the economic impact on those states, and of course the federally funded programs and the international leaders who come to the United States and go to those states. And those are important. We also have impact documents. This is one that you see on the screen that cuts across programs, but we also have impact reports on some work travel, like camp counselor, intern and trainee, and au pair. Those impact reports show that these programs are very successful in advancing foreign policy priorities, which are often around a knowledge of the United States, a more nuanced understanding of the United States, connections to the United States, friendships here, command of the English language, and of course, for participants, the development of their skills. Part of what I talked about before was how we have reached out beyond our members to involve other people in the community. We have an initiative we call People for International Exchange, and this is an opportunity for people to, for organizations, primarily host institutions here in the U.S. And other institutions here to become part of our collective effort to apply to join this initiative. And there are opportunities for advocacy by those folks to receive periodic updates, and then over time to participate in more of our activities. Again, we are primarily focused on representing and involving our members, but we understand that we play a role that's broader than that, and we want to make sure that the stakeholder community has a way to connect with us. And of course, we'd like to have you be involved, and then over time join us as members as well of the Alliance. So with that, I'm going to stop. We have about 10 or 11 minutes before we take a break and we start the next session. So let me ask Evelyn. Evelyn, do we have any questions yet?
We do, yes. One of the questions here is about the issue of consulates. So over the past year, there have been significant inconsistencies between consulates across Europe, and I'll extend that to even across the globe. So do you foresee this continuing, or do you foresee a uniform policy and increased transparency developing for visa issuance?
Yeah, I hope it's the latter. So increased transparency and uniform policy. I think Council Affairs at the State Department would acknowledge that things have been really difficult, in some cases kind of a mess. There, people doing different things in different embassies, and a big part of that has to do with the enormous challenges that are occurring abroad. That'll be one of the first questions we ask of the next panel of people from the State Department, and so we're happy to have them. So I think that we on the international exchange side need to be realistic about the challenges that embassies are facing right now and the degree to which those challenges continue, especially in countries where vaccination rates are fairly low. So we will pose that question to ECA and we'll see what happens. We also, part of what we want to continue to do at the Alliance and with all of you is to think about creative solutions to the challenges that embassies are facing. So part of what we've seen with ECA and the State Department is a willingness to sort of think about specific embassies and countries and to try to figure out whether there are solutions to problems. And so if we're coming up with some of those ideas, some of those solutions and are offering those, I think that'll serve us well. So I should add that in addition to the conversation we're going to have with ECA leadership in just a little bit, Council Affairs will be presenting at the in-person portion of our conference here in Washington, D.C. next week. Other questions?
Yes, this is one that you touched on. So with the lifting of the travel ban coming up on November 8th, one of the ongoing challenges is that not all vaccines will be accepted. So one participant is wondering if you could touch a little bit more upon this and maybe discuss what our next steps for advocacy are.
So I think part of what we so first, let's focus on the good news, right? So part of the good news here is that the administration could have only allowed CDC recognized vaccines to be recognized for people traveling to the United States, and that was certainly a possibility. And that's not what happened. And so that is good news in and of itself. My sense is that getting the administration to look beyond the World Health Organization and the vaccines that it approves is probably just not in the cards. I think that that's the best we can hope for is for the administration to embrace WHO and the way it views and its decisions with respect to vaccines. I know that means some vaccines are not eligible for use for people traveling to the United States, but unless something changes with respect to WHO or the administration's view of WHO's role, I would imagine that that's going to continue.
Next question here is regarding the clarifying rule, and if you could touch upon sort of the status of it as well as an expectation for the timeline.
Yeah. So again, here, like as with what I just said about vaccines, here we want to focus initially on the good news, which is the administration, this administration and the last administration embraced the idea that we need clarifying regulation around au pair to ensure that state and localities understand that federal regulations essentially prevail when it comes to the au pair program and are the regulations that courts and state governments and others ought to be looking to when understanding how the au pair program works and which regulations the sponsors and families will be looking to when they implement these programs. So that's essentially what a clarifying regulation would do. So the good news is that there's support for clarifying those points, and that'll be one of the questions we'll ask of Nicole Elkin in just a little bit. And so I think she will be positioned to share, hopefully, her expectations for that clarifying regulation.
Great. And final question I'm seeing here is how can Alliance members, supporters, and stakeholders best support Alliance appropriations requests and engage with members of Congress?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So a big part of what's necessary, and this is part of what Rick Ruth talked about, is you have to tell your story, right? You have to tell your story effectively to your stakeholders, to your board, to your localities, the people who are impacted by these programs, to participants, Americans especially, who participate, but then also those who come from abroad. It's not enough for people to experience these programs and be aware of them. You have to talk about the impact of these programs, and to do that, you have to measure the impact of these programs. And Casey Slayman talked about this. A little a while ago. Measuring the impact and talking about the impact is really important. So that's one way. Second, if you're a member of the Alliance, participating in our Advocacy Day activities is critical, as is the what we call Exchange Week in the District. And Exchange Week in the District is an opportunity for Alliance members and their stakeholders, hosts, participants, alumni, to go into congressional offices and talk about the local impact of these programs. So again, impact nationally, impact locally, in terms of communication is really important. And those stories, as I said before, make it possible for us to ask for increase in support for these programs, to ask for accommodation of these programs, to ask for them to be continued. And it made it possible for, as you heard, Rick Ruth, to be able to defend these programs back in 2011, specifically the Summer Travel Program, and then other programs before and since. And there's no substitute for that. So we have to measure, we have to develop the impact stories, and then we have to tell those stories. Part of what we do at the Alliance is to facilitate that storytelling through Advocacy Day, through Exchange Day in August, through Exchange Week in the District. International Education Week is coming up. Many of our federally funded organizations have activities during International Education Week. So engaging at those intervals are really critical. And we have to do it all the time, right? So I talked earlier about opponents of these programs being out there on the left and right. For the federally funded exchange program, something I think we have to be thinking about long term is we saw for 4 consistent years the last administration seeking dramatic cuts in funding for exchange programs. That request for lower programs didn't just come out of nowhere, right? That was not, an idea someone had sitting in their office someday, hey, let's ask for this. That was the result of sustained pressure on the right, on our political right, for that kind of request for a cut. People who believe that, say hard power is really important, and that's where we ought to focus our foreign policy dollars, have been pushing for cuts like that before. Now, obviously, as we saw, that push for dramatic cuts was unsuccessful. But if you are running a federally funded program, yes, we're in great shape right now. But remember, the people who push for those cuts, both within the administration and then those people who pushed the administration to propose those cuts, are still out there, and they will be back with those arguments in the future. So all of us have to be aware that there are lots of opportunities. We have a very supportive administration. The pandemic hopefully is going to recede, and we're going to have opportunities to rebuild these programs in the coming years. But the work that we do, educating people about these programs, measuring the impact, and running great programs, that work is evergreen. It has to happen all the time, and we have to continue to do that work. So thank you, Evelyn, for sharing the questions. Thanks to the people who raised those questions. Thank you for your attention. At this point, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. We're going to come back to hear from the ECA leadership, and I'm happy to moderate that panel. So we'll see you all in about 10 minutes. Thank you.